demand for reparations for the enslavement era and beyond has been continuous, and there has been no substantial period of time where the call for redress has been neglected. During the 19th century, the National Enslaved Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association, led by Reverend Isaiah Dickinson and Callie House, had 600,000 dues-paying members seeking to obtain compensation for slavery from federal agencies. During the 1920s, the Honorable Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association galvanized hundreds of thousands of Black people demanding reparations and repatriation. In the early 1960s, Queen Mother Moore of New York presented a petition for reparations to the United Nations on behalf of her Ethiopian Women's Association. And during that same period in 1963, in his book, Why We Can't Wait, yes, Dr. Martin Luther King, yes indeed, proposed a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged, which emphasized redress for the historical victimization and exploitation of Blacks, as well as their present day degradation. In 1968, Black Panther Party listed the issue of reparations and restitution for slave labor as point number 3 of their 10-point program. Also in 1968, the Republic of New Africa proclaimed in its Declaration of Independence, "We claim no rights from the United States of America other than those rights belonging to oppressed people wherever they be in the world, and these include the right to damages, reparations due us for the grievous injuries sustained by ourselves and our ancestors by reason of U.S. lawlessness." In April 1969, the Black Manifesto was adopted by the National Black Economic Development Conference. This manifesto, presented by civil rights activist James Forman, included a demand that white churches and synagogues pay $500 million in reparations to Blacks in the U.S., touted as only the beginning of the amount owed. In the following month, Forman audaciously interrupted Sunday service at Riverside Church in New York, to announce the reparations demand from the Black Manifesto. And guess what? Several religious institutions did in fact respond with financial donations. In 1972, the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana adopted the Anti-Depression Program. Now, what was that? It was an act authorizing the payment of a sum of money in reparations for enslavement, a negotiating commission between representatives of the United States and the Republic of New Africa to determine kind, dates, and other details of paying reparations. The Nation of Islam's publications, Muhammad Speaks, and later the Final Call in the section, What We Want, What We Believe, has demanded that the United States exempt Black people from all taxation as long as we are deprived of equal justice. And the end of the 20th century brought renewed vigor to the call for reparations for people of African descent in the United States, with the founding of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, which at its founding brought several groups, several entities together: the Republic of New Africa, the Black Reparations Commission, the National Conference of Black Lawyers, among others, with the goal of building a mass-based movement for reparations in the United States. And since the founding of NCOBA, the African American Call for Reparations has substantially moved forward, generating what I call the modern day reparations movement. And along the same time frame as NCOBA opening up that casket, we had the African National Reparations Organization and the reparations initiatives of the National Black United Front and the December 1st movement and the Black Radical Congress, and today newer manifestations such as hashtag 40 acres and more, and of course the young folk, the movement for Black lives. And today there is also NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission, which derived its inspiration and modeled after the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which is mobilizing to, as we heard before, demand compensation from the former European colonists. So like CARICOM, NCOBA is opening up that casket with a strategic goal towards formulating a preliminary reparations program through the convening of regional hearings similar to Truth and Reconciliation, and the list goes on. But there have been pivotal moments during the modern day reparations movement, which stand out and really help to open up that casket and push the claim forward. They include Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, What America Owes to Blacks, which was published in 2000. There was this horrendous advertisement published across college campuses by David Horowitz, 10 Reasons Why Reparations is a Bad Idea and Racist Too. That really served to, stir folk up. There was the United Nations Conference, World Conference Against Racism, held in Durban, South Africa, which declared, as we heard earlier, the Atlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity. That was major, as we heard. There was the research compiled by Deidre Farmer-Palman revealing the corporate beneficiaries from the enslavement era. There was the Black Farmers lawsuit, the Tulsa, Oklahoma litigation, the coming to light of the 272 enslaved persons sold by the Jesuits to keep Georgetown University from bankruptcy. There were the academics and works by Carlton Waterhouse and Mary Frances Berry and Raymond Wimbush, and the list goes on and on. But one of the most recent manifestations to opening up that casket was Ta-Nehisi Coates' article in the Atlantic magazine, The Case for Reparations, which basically thrust the issue on living room coffee tables. That magazine sitting there. When you go to the doctor and to the dentist's office, it's sitting right in there. To the mainstream media, when I have people in my own office, young white millennials, coming up with a copy of the article. And, we know that there's been a sea change. So in 1987, legislation was passed in this country authorizing the payment of $20,000 to each Japanese American detention camp survivor. That was cash money. Okay. A $1.5 million trust fund to be used to educate Americans about the suffering of the Japanese Americans. A formal apology from the United States government, and a pardon for all of those convicted of resisting detention camp internment. We kind of slush over that last one, but y'all need to listen to that. A pardon for all those who resisted. How many of our black freedom fighters are still languishing in prison today as a result of the COINTELPRO from the 60s and 70s? A pardon. That was part of the Japanese American redress bill. Let me tell you this, people. It is a sad commentary that the United States government has not taken responsibility for its role in enslavement or post-slavery segregation of millions of blacks. It has never attempted reparation to African Americans for the extortion of labor for many generations, deprivation of their freedom and human rights, and terrorism against them throughout the centuries. The U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives did pass symbolic resolutions apologizing for slavery and segregation, but guess what? The 2009 bill passed by the Senate included a disclaimer that those seeking reparations or cash compensation could not use the apology to support a legal claim against the United States. So after the passage of the Japanese American Redress Bill, NCOBA worked very closely with Congressman John Conyers in helping to draft what became known as H.R. 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. Was it perfect? No. No, it didn't provide not one red cent to anyone. It was just a study bill, just to study the issue. Conyers would always say, we study everything. What's up in the air? What's below the water? Why can't we just study this? This has been an issue that's been studiously avoided for generations, okay? But it was strategic because it was the same strategy that was just recently at that time successful for the Japanese Americans. So year without fail, he introduced H.R. 40. It is that bill that's provided the cover and a mechanism to have a public policy conversation about this issue in the Congress of the United States. The issue of reparations for African Americans was once, in the not too distant past, unthinkable by mainstream America as viable public policy. But But since the introduction of the original reparations study bill, Nkobo has been very active in inspiring several state legislatures and scores of city councils across the country to pass reparations type legislation or HR 40 endorsement resolutions. And just to name a couple of them, examples: Louisiana House of Representatives, the California State Assembly, the city councils of Detroit, Cleveland, Dallas, Chicago, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and more. And again, largely as a result of mobilization initiated by Nkobo during the 90s, numerous civil and human rights organizations, religious groups, professional organizations, civic groups, sororities, fraternities, labor unions, have also endorsed the call for reparations. We're talking about the NAACP, the National Baptist Convention, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Association of Black Psychologists, Psychiatrists, National Conference of Black Political Scientists, National Conference of Black Lawyers, National Bar Association, the International Association of Black Firefighters, the Detroit Board of Education, AFL-CIO, millions, not millions, please, well, that would be nice, hundreds, well, we need to get to that millions. And we heard earlier about the slavery disclosure ordinances, including 4 states, including 11 cities, including Philadelphia. And finally, also survivors of the torture we heard about by Chicago police received an unprecedented reparations package. Really, for this country, that was unprecedented, based on a reparations ordinance passed by the Chicago City Council in 2015. And then Nkobo, also under the leadership of Adwocacy, masterminded a legal strategy that identifies specific categories of harm, of injury areas: peoplehood, education, health, criminal punishment, wealth, power, and the issue goes on. So now as you see, the issue over the years has been continuous and it has been studied enough. So in January, with the beginning of this Congress, the National African American Reparations Commission, NARC, under the leadership of Dr. Ron Daniels and Cam Howard, the co-chair of Nkobo, helped to develop for John Conyers an expanded HR 40 bill, which goes beyond the study for a commission to actually develop reparations proposals. Not just study, we've studied it ad infinitum. So, I submit that in the context of Black people in America, the quest for reparations essentially constitutes 4 elements. Number 1, the formal acknowledgement of historical wrong and an official, unfettered apology for the dehumanization and atrocities of the enslavement era and beyond. And again, I say unfettered because remember that Senate apology bill? Okay, we will apologize, but you can't use our apology for your claim for reparations. The second element, the recognition that the injury has continued throughout the years and it still manifests today. Element number 3, the commitment to redress by the federal government, which sanctioned the enslavement and subsequent segregation, and by corporate entities and private institutions and religious entities which enjoyed unjust enrichment from the era, and for the actual compensation in whatever form or forms are agreed upon. So, Nkechi, why? You keep talking about the federal government. Why is that so critical? Wasn't all the harm done by the states? So you see, I learned from Brother Imari Obadeli that we must remember the origins of the Black nation in North America. We are the descendants of Africans kidnapped and transported to the United States with the explicit complicity of the United States government and every single arm of the United States lawmaking and law enforcing machinery, U.S. federal law, state law, high court decisions, lower court decisions, the dehumanization, the atrocities, the terrorism of our enslavement in the U.S. They were not isolated instances. If I might be so blatant as was stated earlier, it was a matter of war. War conducted under the specific authority of the United States Constitution. The kidnapping was a wrongful act for which our ancestors and we are as their heirs are entitled to damages. The enslavement was a wrongful act for which our ancestors and we as their heirs are entitled to damages. The stealing of our labor was a wrongful act, as was the genocide we are still suffering. We are entitled to damages, to reparations, to reparatory justice. The compensations we speak of are owed to us. So all this was sanctioned by the Constitution. U.S. Constitutional Article 1, Clause 1, Section 9, expressly guaranteed and sanctioned the continued importation of kidnapped African prisoners of war to every state that might desire us until the year 1808. That article also upheld the further dehumanization of the African by relegating our status to that of 3/5 of a white man. And most egregious, it was war conducted against the African on this soil under the authority of yet another constitutional provision, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3, also known as the Fugitive Slave Provision, which mandated that no enslaved person, even if he or she had reached a free state, none of us were free. It was the duty, it was the obligation, it was the constitutional responsibility of every and any white man, woman, or child to track down the escaped African and deliver him or her up to the government. Oh yes, you know I'm not making this up. We need to open up that casket. The 13th Amendment, passed in 1865, recognized the freedom of all enslaved Africans and made it illegal to continue slavery except for that ridiculous except as punishment for a crime cause. I hope everyone saw the 13th by Ava DuVernay. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, Google it up, 13th by Ava, that 13th clause. So anyway, 13th Amendment made it legal except for that thing. But no payment, however, was made for stolen labor, land, cultural rape, physical rape, economic exploitation. In fact, the Dred Scott case, law students, have been decided scarcely 8 years prior, in which a Supreme Court justice ruled what? That a black person in America had no rights, which a white person was bound to respect, and that neither Dred Scott nor any black person could be a citizen of the United States in the manner in which that word was used in the Constitution. You see, when they wrote "we the people," they meant we, the white people. Although the 13th Amendment set no restrictions on the freedom of formerly enslaved people, the 14th Amendment, passed 2.5 years later, robbed them of some of their hard-won freedom. Yeah, that's what I said. The 14th Amendment robbed us of that international right to self-determination. You see, the 14th Amendment imposed the obligations of United States citizenship upon the African in America without his or her informed consent, and without the benefits of that citizenship, and without any meaningful discussion of political alternatives inherent in the international right to self-determination. Now, you might not have thought of it in these terms, due to the white ethnocentric manner in which education in the United States is generally taught, but I must say the audacity. How are you going to take a free person, okay, and tell him he's got to become a part of your family, i.e. a citizen of your country, especially since you had castrated his father, raped his mother, sold the children to your relatives, didn't ask him if he wanted to join your family, didn't ask if he wanted to start his own family. We're talking about 1868, y'all. If the African were free, no one, not even the ex-slaveholder, could define the African's future status for him and impose a status upon him. This was the newly freed persons, the Africans alone. It was the fruit of the right to self-determination. Thus, that is why it is pertinent to understand the reparations is not solely an economic concept. It is a political concept as well, and it is a cultural one. You see, the Black American claim to reparations is not limited to stolen labor, but also for unjust war and cultural aggression as well. When I was first exposed to this issue, it was in the context that the political essence of slavery was not merely found in the economic exploitation of labor, but also in the illegal imposition of U.S. jurisdiction on the enslaved and her descendants. It can never be overemphasized that Black people are on this soil as a result of warfare supported by the United States and other nations, and are here as the result of a vicious colonization, cultural rape, economic exploitation under chattel and mental bondage and terror, and the full ramifications of this historical record must not be endlessly ignored. Open up that casket. This is why reparatory justice is so important. Every time we ran away, it didn't matter if we just walked away, tiptoed quietly in the night, Harriet Tubman. It didn't matter if we organized elaborate slave insurrections, Demarvisi, it didn't matter. We fled to Pennsylvania or New York. They were going to come after us, and with their armed forces and with their paddy rollers and with their militias and with their dogs. Why didn't it matter? Because the white folk had decided that they were going to live here. Wasn't going to be no 100 years of Palmares liberation, no Gangazumbi here. They vowed that they would not just let us just walk into the woods and swamps and develop our own and they go back to France or England and Spain because it got too hot. This was not going to be their vacation spot. They had planned to stay. And so they chased us and they pursued us and they tracked us down, they beat us, they castrated us, they lynched us, and they sought to quell all forms of resistance. So, my brothers and sisters, when we see the video of the ruthless pursuit, chasing and blatant gunning down of Walter Scott in South Carolina like a runaway slave, when we see the gunning down of Michael Brown in Ferguson like a dog in the street, when we see Eric Garner in New York being choked to death and the countless others, all by those who have been sworn to uphold the law, we know that there is a connection between the U.S. criminal punishment system and the necessity for reparatory justice. When we hear about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and the impact of lead paint on black children in inner city communities, we know that there is a connection between the disparities in the healthcare system and the necessity for reparatory justice. When we see that black youth are selling drugs, we know that there is a connection between the lack of economic opportunity and the necessity for reparatory justice. When we see that prison bids are constructed based on the test scores of black boys in the 3rd grade, we know that there is a connection between the educational system and the necessity for reparatory justice. There is a connection between post-traumatic slavery syndrome and post-incarceration stress syndrome and the necessity for reparation justice. And when we see that little black girls prefer white dolls as pretty and smart over black dolls characterized as ugly and dumb, there is a need for reparatory justice. Open up that casket. The connections between the past and the present abound. And in the midst of the current Me Too movement, a group of sisters at a National African American Reparations Commission convening recently got together impromptu and issued the following statement, quote, "As attention is called today to the ugly reality of present-day sexual harassment, there must also be attention to the historical sexual violations of black women during the enslavement era and beyond. For well over 350 years, black women were viciously raped, savagely beaten, tortured, had fetuses cut out of their bellies, oftentimes by the perpetrator of sexual assault upon them. Women who resisted were terrorized, continuously defiled, disrespected, and lynchings were commonplace. Oftentimes, white women were complicit in condoning the sexual crimes of white men against black women, and oftentimes falsely accused black men of rape, leading to their murder and dismemberment. Just as we do not condone or take lightly present-day disclosures and accusations of sexual harassment against even the architect of H.R. 40. The unfettered crimes against women of African descent during the enslavement era and beyond that to date still await remedy must never be forgotten. And we must begin the process of national healing by acknowledging the historic harm of enslavement sanctioned by the federal government, which led to colossal and commonplace sexual violations against enslaved women. There is a connection, and each harm must be compensated. And it is past time that the role of the federal government be opened up and acknowledged. But there's more. I submit that the slavery that flourished in the United States and its legacy constituted an immoral and inhumane deprivation of the African's life, liberty, and cultural heritage. And this word has been thrown around a whole lot today, okay? But I'm going to break it down because it does, in fact, constitute an act of genocide as defined under the International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was ratified by the Senate in 1986 after 38 long years and signed into law by President Reagan as the Genocide Convention Implementation Act. Now, I know some of y'all are saying, I know we've heard it all day, but we heard it in the context of the Native peoples, we heard it in the context of the islands and all of that, it's okay. But When we talk about genocide in the context of black people in this country, so, oh no, Nkechi, you've gone a little bit too far. You can ruminate on reparations, but genocide, don't go there, girl. But I must, because we can no longer sweep it under the rug. We got to do what? Open up that casket. What is the international accepted definition of genocide? I'm just going to recite 3 of the elements. Number 1, killing members of the group. Number 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Number 3, deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring upon their destruction in whole and or in part. That is the basis of the international definition of genocide, which has been ratified by the United States and really is the only international human rights treaty that is applicable in U.S. law because of the Implementation Act. If you want to find out a little bit more about it, you Google up American Constitution Society, Taifa, genocide, because I did do an article dealing with the criminal justice system and outlined each of those elements. But that's not all. Genocide is not the only actionable act. Also punishable is conspiracy to commit genocide, directing public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in its commission. And I know Professor Natsu Seitu can tell you all of this, and she's the international law scholar, but it's there. Y'all connect the dots. Not surprisingly, one of the reasons for the 38-year delay in Senate ratification of the treaty was the concern that black people in America will use the treaty to their advantage. Oh yes, that concern was not without substance. In 1951, William Patterson, W.B. Du Bois, Mary Church Terrell, and 91 others submitted a petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime of the U.S. government against the Negro people, charging what? The United States with genocide. The physical killings of black people, so well established as to be a matter of what we call under the law judicial notice, okay? The assaults, maiming, psychological terror, educational deprivations all fit within the category of imposing serious bodily or mental harm, and the list kind of goes on. But perhaps more devastating than the loss of black life is the destruction wreaked by what Du Bois talked about, the tightening up of black codes. This is in Black Reconstruction in America. He said they could own nothing. They could make no contracts. They could not control their children. They could hold no property. They could not hire out. They could not legally marry. They could not appeal from their masters. They could be punished at will. They could not testify in court. They could be imprisoned by their owners. And the criminal offense of assault and battery could not be committed on the person of a slave. The slave owed to his master and family a respect without bounds and an absolute obedience, and this authority could be transmitted to others. A slave could not sue his master, had no right of redemption, no right to education or religion. A promise made to a slave by his master had no force of validity. Children followed the condition of the mother. The slave had no access to the judiciary, could be condemned to death for striking a white person. The entire legal apparatus was used by those with the power to do so, to establish a legal tradition that sought to strip blacks of all human dignity. Genocide. Don't be scared by it. It's international law, and it applies to us in this country as well. We are entitled to reparations. The compensations we speak of are owed to us. Let me be unquestionably clear. There is no statute of limitations on redressing human rights violations, thank you, Vereen. And debts are neither absolved nor diminished by the passage of time. In fact, over time, unpaid debts grow larger with interest.